Welcome back, everyone. We're digging into distinguishing excellence, and we're going to hop right back into it. During the break, we actually were having a great conversation that I wish we had recorded for all of you, but we're going to try and recreate it right now. And Amy, you were talking about one of your students with a real interest and focus in computer science. That's certainly become more and more popular these days. So tell us a little bit about that student's distinguishing excellence.
Yeah, and this student, a bright kid, your stereotypical good grades, good scores, right? But he didn't care so much about that. Like he just was really interested in computer science, in this new AI stuff and what's going on, and just followed it. And he noticed this was the tail end of the pandemic, and his younger sister and their friends, like a few years younger, were really getting quite lazy and bored and kind of down. And so he encouraged them to come over and sit with him and learn some basic coding skills. And he saw that they got really excited. And these are kids who aren't necessarily interested in computer science. So he started doing that with them. And then some of the parents of the friends of his sister said, oh, we're overwhelmed. We're working from home. We're doing all of this. Do you think you could take them for an hour or two? We might give you a little money. Maybe you could charge. He actually created a coding camp, and after school, and then it became weekend. It slowly became a summer program. He recruited friends. It became over 100 plus kids signed up, and tons of volunteer student mentors. And it taught him, he get to spread his love of coding and computer science, get younger kids and especially young women interested at a very young age, get them to feel confident and ask questions. And he, in the end, he ended up going to Stanford. He thought he was going to go into computer science, but he said, you know what? I might want to be a teacher or a professor, because he didn't realize he had those skills, which he learned through doing that for a couple of years. He was a really neat young man, and it was never, Amy, will this help me? How do I put this on my resume? I had to encourage him to kind of, he just was like doing it because he loved it and what he saw.
Right, right. And actually that brings up a really great point about, it's all well and good for students to be out there doing these really interesting things. But when you were talking about, Amy, your young woman who was thinking about writing about the summer STEM programs that she did, and you were like, well, there's also this really cool thing you did with the, your grandmother and all of that. And it's sometimes helping students to think about how do I bring this into my application in an impactful way. And Zaragoza, you had a great example of a student who actually did not write about a particular, the DE necessarily, but wrote about something else. So tell us about that student, which I love this story.
Yeah, this was a quiet student who, I got to know over several years. And usually whenever we talk, it would always be about, his computer science project. And, don't get me wrong, he did incredible things with respect to that and had leadership all across the board with respect to computer science. But what really made me connect with him was when he would write about his local Chinese community. And, one of the things that he wrote about within his essay was just simply the fact that he, was not considered a really great dancer, and he was performing in this fan dance for his community. And the director said, oh, maybe you should handle lighting or tech. and rather than get discouraged by that, he went into his room, put on the music softly so his parents wouldn't hear, and he practiced that fan dance. And, the joy that he exuded at the end of his essay when he saw his parents and the pride they had for him, at the end of this essay, just, gave one goosebumps. And, I like to sometimes tell students it's not always necessarily about impressing your reader. Sometimes it's about making your reader like you. That's going to be important, because you can always impress them in the other parts of your application, but you also need to get them to like you, to advocate for you, to say, hey, I want this particular student in. They're just as impressive as everyone else, but I like them.
Right, but there's
And
something about him. Yeah,
there's
I
something about
remember. Yeah, I remember a student writing. His essay was funny, and that just really engaged me. And again, we're getting a little away from the distinguishing excellence piece here. This student happened to be a super talented journalist, so it didn't surprise that his essay itself was really well done. But it did make him stand out in an applicant pool where we had about 25 students from his school alone applying. And I was sort of like, this kid, there were students who had technically maybe a higher ranking, although very similar grades and test scores. So he really was not a lesser than applicant. But when you wonder why the kid who's number 10 and not the kid who's number 1 in the class gets in, it's these are some of the examples. On the flip side of that, I worked with a student a few years ago, already a while ago now, truthfully, who was really into environmental issues and did a lot of things related to the environment, and was actually the youngest LEED certified person in the country, LEED being a measure of environmental, boy, I should probably have looked up the exact definition of this, but basically you're all really in on the best environmental things to do when you're building. And he had written an essay about being on the water in a sailboat. And it was nicely written, but there was nothing about the essay that sort of spoke to me about him as a person. And in that situation, I felt like he was really missing an opportunity to help the reader understand why he was so passionate about the environment. And yes, being on the water, you could make that connection, but it really wasn't kind of doing that. So as you think about the things you've accomplished as you're applying sideways, you want to think about, is this, where can I bring this into my application? Is it going to be in a supplemental response? Is it going to be my main essay? Is it going to be something else? Because that's an important component of the DE, is you have to be able to get it into your application so that it resonates with your reader. And then Amy, you also had an example that you were going to share of a computer science student. Yeah.
Well, it's a
Or different
chemistry
one.
student. Yeah, it's a
Chemistry.
chemistry
Yes.
student,
Sorry.
and it follows nicely, Beth, of applying sideways. And I do want to share with our listeners that the majority of people out there students are not going to have a DE. Adults don't have a DE, right? And I don't use the word passion so easily, because most of us don't have a passion. We have interest. And I had a student who knew at a young age he was interested in chemistry, and a very good chemistry student. And when I got him, we talked about him writing his essay about chemistry, and I was like, all right, it's good. But it just wasn't that different. Didn't stand out in any way. I could tell his interest and his love for chemistry. But this was also during the pandemic. And his grandparents moved in, his aunt moved in, he had 2 younger siblings. He saw his mother and father working full time. His mother was cooking 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. She looked exhausted. He walked in one day and said, how can I help? That then became a huge passion, not just interest, passion. He became a cook with his mother. He took a burden off of her, but he saw how his family members loved his food. He bought the book, Salt, Acid, Fat, Heat. He read everything about it. He started doing chemical experiments with food and taste, kind of like that new book, Lessons in Chemistry, that came out by Bonnie Garmis recently, but that I love. And it reminded me of him a lot. But he really leaned into this interest, and he wants to be a chemist, but he said, I think I will always cook. I will always do that. Now, is that a stereotypical DE? No, not like compared to the ones we've been talking about, but it is applying sideways. And in the end, he wrote his essay about that experience of helping his mom and learning to love cooking and building his confidence, but learning about the chemistry of cooking. And his essay brought me to tears. And he ended up applying to and getting into Georgia Tech. And I believe that essay, he had the grades and the scores, but that essay differentiated him and showed the personality, showed the compassion to his family, leaning into something completely different, but a little bit related. Perfect example.
Yeah. And And again, I think a really great place to dig in a little bit, which is that, as you said, as I said, and Zaragoza, I'm sure, as you have said earlier in this segment as well, is just that most, if you try, it's very difficult to map out a distinguishing excellence. If it was that easy, everyone would do it. It's not that easy. And you can have things that you're really interested in, and you can follow those interests, and they're not necessarily going to result in you being the top debater in the country. I have a student that was his distinguishing excellence, and he coupled it with something else where he developed a tutoring program that he sold to a handful of school districts, right? That's impressive stuff. But debating on its own, or, getting involved in tutoring and just finding something that you really enjoy doing, and then being able to maybe express that in an essay, for example, just about how, but it's got to be authentic. And if you can do that, it's going to automatically make you just a little bit more interesting in whatever applicant pool you are in. So, in as much as I can, and I'm going to ask each of you to share your kind of final thoughts on this, but in mine would be just to, rather than always thinking, what do I need to do? What do colleges like to see? Rather than saying that, say, what do I want to learn more about? What do I enjoy doing? And can I do more of that? Now, if the answer is I love playing video games, unless you're going to be an esport champion, that's probably not, something you should pursue. But I do think, within reason, of course, is asking, what do I want to do, rather than what do the colleges want to see me do? Because the colleges have no idea what they want to see you do. They want to see what you want to do, right? So do that. Zaragoza, what about you? Final thoughts as it comes to this kind of thing?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's not about doing things to get into a particular school. It really is about finding a school that's going to allow you to do the things that you want to do.
Yes.
Okay, and take it to the next level. And I think that's what's most important. When I do have a student who's so focused in on the schools and doing things, I'm usually thinking, I'm not so sure you're going to get in. But it's those students who can really articulate, this is what I love doing, and I'd love to be able to do it at your institution. I kind of think sometimes some universities are not necessarily looking for freshmen, they're looking for alums.
Yeah, great point. Amy, final thoughts from you?
Yeah. So I'll admit here, I like those singing television show competitions. I love American Idol and The Voice and all of that. And I was watching The Voice recently, and they asked one of the coaches to give, to mentor and give some thoughts before they had to go out for one of the semifinals. And it was a quiet singer. It's not one of those belters, right, or rockers. And the coach said, don't try to outsing the other people. Be yourself. Just go up there and be your genuine, true self. And I don't think you have to think about, like you said, I say this to every client, it's not about what the colleges want. Just be you. Keep being you. And if that means you're driven and you drive people crazy because you're pushing them and you don't say no, and you keep being you. Now, with respect and all of that, but just keep being you, and you're going to end up in the right place. You're going to match with the right place.
I love it. Thank you guys so much for joining me today to talk about this. The sun is coming out. It's, I feel like we got to all the points that we wanted to make, and I really appreciate it. Next week, Shannon is going to be here, and she's going to be talking about New Year's resolutions and student loan repayment. Sounds fun. But important. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you would leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, we would love that. If you have questions for us, you can send them to us at gettingin.voiceamerica@gmail.com. You can also leave them on our Instagram or on Facebook or on YouTube. And we're here every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern and 1 p.m. Pacific. So check us out.